Recently, we received a private message from a viewer. Among the meager audience of our channel, this is the very first time we have received a direct inquiry. For now, let us call this viewer Mr. Number 1. Mr. Number 1 asked, why do we only discuss the past lives of tragic or deceased dictators? Why can't we analyze the destiny of a tyrant who is still alive? In response, we searched through the text of the Bible and found no such restriction. Therefore, we reply to Mr. Number 1 right here, as you wish. This time, WTF Past Lives will lock its cold lens of destiny squarely on a dictator who is still breathing but has long deserved his ultimate damnation, Vladimir Putin. Compared to the deceased Iranian cleric Khamenei, whose 45-year rule brought nothing but ruin to his country, this Russian autocrat has claimed several times more lives in his 26-year reign. Through this liquidation of his sins, we intend to remind the divine order that it is high time to arrange for this notorious tyrant to meet his end. After replacing the resigning President Boris Yeltsin as acting president in 1999, Vladimir Putin served 2 consecutive presidential terms from 2000 to 2008. He then exploited a constitutional loophole by installing his loyal puppet Dmitry Medvedev as president while stepping down to become prime minister, maintaining his tight grip on core power. 4 years later, he returned for 2 more presidential terms and orchestrated a constitutional reform in 2020, allowing himself to rule until 2036. Along this path of absolute power, he has bred oligarchic cartels, assassinated political rivals, and launched ceaseless wars to manufacture his legitimacy, claiming that the West seeks to invade Russia and that without his reign, Russia would perish. From the Second Chechen War to the Russo-Georgian War, the annexation of Crimea, to the Donbass conflict and Syrian intervention, casualties initially hovered around tens of thousands. However, his regime hit a concrete wall with the recent invasion of Ukraine, pushing combined casualties past the staggering 1 million mark. Across his 26 years of engineered conflict to sustain his reign, the total death toll exceeds 2 million souls. Aside from the victims of his invasions, the most unfortunate are the young men from Russia's impoverished rural regions, alongside the cannon fodder reinforcements dispatched from North Korea. Having exhausted all means of deception, the regime can no longer find willing soldiers and has resorted to raiding rural villages, dragging conscripts by force to the front lines. To audit this ledger, one must first understand how the power-hungry Putin constructed this infernal system step by step. Over 30 years ago, he was merely an obscure mid-level KGB spy stationed in Dresden, East Germany. On the day the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union dissolved, he watched in sheer terror as an angry mob surrounded his office, while the supreme core of power in Moscow fell into dead silence. In that exact moment, a profound sense of nihilism and fear was branded into his psyche. Once a system loses control, no matter how grand the institution, even the weakest populace morphs into a raging mob. Only absolute violence and perpetual power can safeguard one's own skin. In 1999, destiny handed him an absurd springboard. As a frail Boris Yeltsin relinquished his grip, this cold, tight-lipped espionage chief deployed a pathologically ruthless strategy to hijack the destiny of Russia overnight. Why did he do it? Because in the deepest recesses of his soul, he was never a modern statesman, but a 19th century medieval Tsar trapped inside a 21st century KGB suit. He modeled his philosophy on Joseph Stalin. Death is the ultimate solution to all problems. No man, no problem. He chose to burn the flesh and blood of Russia's 140 million citizens as a sacrifice to the phantom, great Russian empire of his delusions. Terrified of being forgotten by history and horrified of dying like a geopolitical insect, he chose to suffocate the world beneath his absolute authority. During the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 1990s, a handful of well-connected businessmen rapidly amassed astronomical wealth through backroom deals during the privatization of state assets. They monopolized the nation's core industries and emerged as the infamous Seven Oligarchs. Under Yeltsin's chaotic transition to democracy, their influence was colossal, capable of swinging national elections and steering the state apparatus. Upon taking office, Putin swiftly offered a transactional peace. As long as they pledged absolute fealty and abandoned political ambitions, they could keep their fortunes. For Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the wealthiest oligarch who dared to defy him, Putin executed a merciless liquidation, imprisoning him and forcing him into permanent exile. These oligarchic syndicates embedded themselves deeply into Russia's energy sectors and military-industrial complexes. To ensure their continued profitability and loyalty, Putin was forced to launch a new war every few years, enabling these oligarchs to harvest immense fortunes from wartime blood money. French investigative reports reveal that these magnates are mere puppets. None of them genuinely love Putin, yet none dare to whisper a word of dissent. Their wealth is essentially his wealth. If Putin demands a financial transfer and they dare refuse, a swift, violent assassination awaits them in the shadows. Throughout Putin's 26-year reign, human lives have never been mere statistics. They are the very bricks cementing the foundation of his imperial throne. Consider the assassination ledger in the dark. Former agent Alexander Litvinenko was poisoned with radioactive polonium-210 in London. Opposition leader Boris Nemtsov was gunned down steps away from the Kremlin. Investigative journalist Anna Politkovskaya was executed in her own apartment elevator, and Yevgeny Prigozhin, chief of the Wagner PMC, perished in a sudden plane crash shortly after his failed mutiny. In recent years, political prisoners have faced systemic torture and degradation inside Russian gulags, culminating in the deaths of opposition figure Alexei Navalny and multiple dissidents under brutally severe confinement conditions. Consider the scorched earth of Syria and Chechnya. Hard data from Human Rights Watch records that since the Russian military intervention in Syria to prop up the Assad regime in 2015, its airstrikes claimed 9,364 lives, including 3,804 civilians in the first year alone. This is to say nothing of the historical carnage when his artillery systematically flattened the Chechen capital of Grozny into blood-soaked gravel. Consider the war of aggression against Ukraine. The bloodiest chapter belongs to the ongoing war in Ukraine. According to leaked data and Western intelligence reports, this conflict has extracted an allied and enemy casualty toll nearing an astonishing 1.8 million people. Millions of innocent civilians have been displaced, and tens of thousands of Ukrainian children have been forcibly and unlawfully deported to Russia, prompting the International Criminal Court, ICC, to issue a historic arrest warrant against Putin for war crimes. This war, which Putin delusionally believed would conclude within mere days or weeks, has now ground on into its 4th anniversary, and it is highly likely to be his final campaign. Russia, once boasting the world's second most powerful military, now watches helplessly as Ukrainian retaliatory strikes breach Moscow itself. For decades, his regime relied on the leftover inheritance of Soviet military muscle to project invincibility, engineering conflicts while enabling his oligarchs to harvest blood profits. But Ukraine's fierce resistance and sophisticated drone strikes have systematically targeted Russia's economic lifelines, bombing oil depots, power grids, military manufacturing plants, and ammunition dumps. The constant bombardment has forced Putin to retreat into underground bunkers. He can no longer turn war into a lucrative enterprise. The domestic market faces severe gasoline shortages, and exports of natural gas and crude oil, the regime's primary revenue streams, are on the brink of total severance due to aggressive international sanctions. With the state budget completely swallowed by military expenditures, the Russian economy is staring into an abyss of collapse. Despite draconian censorship laws, once silent lawmakers and academics are now openly issuing warnings. If the war is not halted immediately, Russia will completely implode. One might ask, how can a tyrant responsible for over 2 million deaths sustain his autocratic grip? Is it due to his self-proclaimed piety as a devout Orthodox Christian? In reality, orthodoxy is merely a cynical instrument deployed by Putin to sculpt society to his whims. He converted religious doctrine into state laws and the core of official ideology, granting the government powers to censor all artistic works under the guise of defending traditional values, while masquerading as a global beacon of conservatism. Yet the almighty omnipotent is not so easily mocked. Based on the cold mechanics of historical justice, 3 precise endings have been mapped out for Putin. End 1. Stalin's suffocating chamber. Putin's measures against betrayal have escalated to a point of clinical paranoia. Every dish must pass through a mobile biolab for toxin screenings. His meetings feature a cartoonishly long wooden table to physically isolate his inner circle by several meters. This absolute trembling mistrust will craft his most poetic exit. Just like a paranoid Joseph Stalin in 1953, who spent his final conscious moments paralyzed in a pool of his own urine following a cerebral hemorrhage, Putin will find himself completely alone. The guards and sentries stationed outside his door, frozen by pure terror of his wrath, will not dare to breach the room to salvage his life. He will slowly, silently suffocate inside the absolute security perimeter he engineered, until his soul grows entirely cold. End 2. Ceausescu's sandcastle collapse. He is acutely aware that the moment his heart stops, his empire will immediately fracture into violent infighting. Although he has quietly positioned young militarily competent loyalists like Dmitry Mironov, the man famous for scaring off a wild bear with gunfire to save Putin, relinquishing authority in a tyrannical framework is synonymous with inviting execution. His singular choice is to die on the throne. Yet when the ultimate economic collapse engineered by Ukraine reaches its tipping point, his carefully calibrated Kremlin matrix will rupture into chaotic oligarchic coups within 24 hours. Putin could face the exact fate of Nicolae Ceausescu, jeered by an angry crowd during a public speech, abandoned by a military that secretly switches sides, swiftly arrested and executed. His regime will dissolve like sand against a raging tide. End 3. The International Tribunal's Trial of the Century. The divine algorithm governing history frequently employs the most dark, ironic humor. When the regime can no longer harvest poor rural boys for conscription and is forced to draft the silver spoon sons of Moscow's ruling elites, the paradigm will shift instantly. He will be treated exactly like Slobodan Milosevic of Yugoslavia, packaged as the ultimate bargaining chip by his own inner circle and traded to The Hague in a sudden geopolitical transaction. While these elite oligarchic families fear Putin, the moment their own sons are ordered to become frontline ammunition, they will ruthlessly orchestrate his betrayal rather than submit. Putin will stand beneath the high-definition close-up lenses of global media, receiving the final liquidation of his 26-year tyranny.
We cannot alter the history where dictators compress the world with their delusions, but the algorithm of history has never spared a self-proclaimed czar. 2 million slaughtered souls, 4 nations torn apart by fire and iron. This suffocating blood debt is burning quietly on the pages of the charred ledger we have just opened before you. To those watching across the screen, have you ever felt the suffocation of your own life being violently compressed by an incompetent system? Looking at these 3 converging lines of fate, which ending fuels your ultimate sense of justice against this hellish regime? Do you thirst to see him expire in the desperate, lonely pool of a stroke-ridden room, or face an insurgent firing squad in a public square, or tremble under global scrutiny in the dock at The Hague? Or do you possess a more spectacular vision of how this tyrant should meet his end? Burn that exact word or your own ideal design of historical vengeance straight into the comment section right now. This marks the dawn of a new frontier for WTF Past Lives.
If you despise the cruelty of single men sacrificing whole nations to feed their private megalomania, hit the like button, subscribe, and deploy this fearless broadcast across the network. Next time, when the fallen angel's finger glows once more with celestial light, the divine ledger will pivot toward two other living tyrants in the east and the north. Monsters who castrate the dignity of hundreds of millions via hypertech digital totalitarianism and systemic starvation. Whom do you demand we audit next? Invoke his name in the comments below. We will meet at our next tribunal of souls. See you next time.
Hey, still here? Enjoying the despair of your past life, aren't you? Did that past life make you shout WTF inside? If yes, welcome back. You've regained your memory. Trust me, you are so much happier now. Since you survived, support this down and out angel. Like and subscribe to keep the updates flowing. It won't send you to heaven, but it lets me stay here with you in hell. See ya.